If you spend enough time looking around YouTube video game related channels, then you've probably caught a glimpse of Playdate sometime over the past year. It's a small handheld gaming console from a company called Panic that's based in Portland, Oregon, and it comes with a season of bespoke games delivered weekly. It displays 1-bit graphics on a reflective screen, and it has an analog crank on the side. Playdate went up for pre-order last month, and I got in on the first wave of devices. I want to talk about why I pre-ordered this strange, arguably pretty expensive and limited handheld, not to convince you to buy one yourself or to warn you against buying one, but instead to examine Playdate's marketing and design choices, and maybe along the way we can learn something about the ways in which we interact with marketing and different types of products and the promises that they make to us. And yeah, I'm ready when you are. If you go looking for more information about Playdate, you will not be able to avoid this device's very strong branding. Promotional videos for Playdate released by Panic are slick. Their update video from June opens with this frankly stunning piece of animation that combines the inherent nostalgia of pixel art with bouncy, playful, and modern design and animation choices. I'm not saying the animation is cutting edge. It definitely has hints of other contemporary work, particularly the animation of pixel art masters Ivan Dixon and Paul Robertson, at least to my eye, but it's also just impeccable. Even the sound design is just spot on. The Playdate website is clear and readable with plenty of style to go around. The color palette is simple, highlighting the device's signature shade of yellow for obvious reasons. This shade of yellow is also used in abundance in video thumbnails from Panic and in the videos themselves. In graphic design, it's widely understood that bright yellow is a reliable and cheap way to get someone's attention. Decades ago, yellow was heavily associated with grindhouse movies, cheap and dirty films that probably didn't have big marketing budgets. Likewise, the subgenre of Italian cinema referred to as giallo, which means yellow in Italian, was named after the yellow spines of the cheap paperbacks many of these movies were based on. That association has definitely shifted a bit in recent years. CD Projekt Red used a bright yellow background for many of its company announcements regarding the game Cyberpunk 2077, and in its usage here for Playdate, it feels like it's meant to evoke creativity and joy, which are rather typical associations you'll find if you Google something along the lines of "what colors mean." But to me, the strongest piece of branding for the Playdate, outside of the device itself and its games, both of which we'll talk about later, is the official promotional video for Playdate, released in early June. Now, calling this video strong branding doesn't mean that I like it. In fact, there's a lot about this video I don't like. For some context, this ad was produced by Sandwich, a video production company and marketing agency, that doesn't even bother to define itself on the About page of its website, instead filling the space with lofty and sort of sideways creative statements about the nature of their business. They're based in LA, actually, over in the Arts District, which is also pretty close to Skid Row, which is a real place, and which is slowly being gentrified because property values are relatively cheap over there for very predictable reasons. Sandwich also claims online that they basically invented the modern explainer video, so thanks for that, guys, I guess. Coming through their work, it seems like a lot of their clients are trendy one-word companies that are directly related to tech or otherwise related to the contemporary tech startup aesthetic, such as Descript, Rothy's, Ipsy, Slack, Outdoorsy, Wistia, Robinhood, Square, Etsy, Instacart, Facebook, Salesforce. Anyway, you get the idea. I wanted to bring up Sandwich because a lot of their work feels like it's assembling an accidental time capsule of a specific style of marketing that's probably going to end up feeling pretty dated 5 or 10 years from now. And that's not necessarily a critique of the work itself. This is just the territory that comes with being trendy. But to summarize this style, it often involves direct address.
Like it or not, there's gonna come a day when you think,
I have something you want, and you have something I want.
Your browser, it's bad.
Some hip library music, and a general tone of fun and quirky innocence.
Oh my god, we record a lot of stuff.
To me, it feels like this overall style kind of trickled down from the high-profile indie movies of the late 2000s, with Little Miss Sunshine remaining a watershed film in this category. The style can also be seen in movies like The Greasy Strangler or Lemon. Come to think of it, we should probably come up with a name for this specific style. I really haven't come up with many good ideas. The most obvious or straightforward one that I've gotten to is hipster talk. Okay, so hold on. I finally remembered the better name that I had for this style of marketing, so I'm recording this bit days later. Live action Alegria. I think that's slightly better than hipster talk, so let's go with that. There are hipster stylings to these types of ads, and they often include direct but stylized voiceover. I'm not trying to come after this style as a whole, and marketing is what it is. I'm not going to expect endless creativity and originality here, but the version of hipster talk that the Say Hello to Playdate ad uses is especially something. So instead of the typical voiceover character that speaks directly to us, the viewer, this ad instead sets up a conversation between the usual voiceover character, who represents the company behind the product, and a character who I guess is supposed to function as a surrogate for the viewer. It really feels like a lot of the talking points in this ad are based on a realistic understanding of what someone would probably have questions about when they were presented with the Playdate for the first time. But the tricky part here is that when you set up this dynamic where a character is meant to represent you, a real person, there's a lot of presumption going on, and if your feelings start to stray from what your insert character is doing and saying, it could lead to a disconnect, or worse, a sense of spite, I think. The ad tells you repeatedly, in implicit terms, you think this about this.
It's a new thing. It plays games.
I already have a thing that plays games.
And you, the real person, are left to either agree with that or to say internally, well, no, that's not what I think about this. But hey, maybe marketing people think that even a negative reaction is considered to be just engagement of some kind, and they see that as a positive. So this audience insert character also carries with it the implication that the actor portraying the character belongs to the product's target audience, which in this case is, I guess, an easily persuadable, possibly bisexual man in his late 20s or early 30s. And I say that kind of as a joke, but you know what? I could very easily see that being the age range, at least, of the target audience for Playdate. This demographic covers people old enough to have strong nostalgic associations with now retro handhelds like the Game Boy, Tamagotchi devices, or the Game Gear, I guess, if anyone actually had that. This demographic is also likely to already be into gaming to some degree, especially if they came across this ad in the first place, and they probably have at least some disposable income, making the sticker price of $189, not including tax or shipping, seem pretty low risk. They show a good number of kids in the ad as well, but I don't really think that this ad is meant for young children. More than anything, this just continues to apply to our target demo, since a fair number of people between 26 and 35 and up have kids of their own, and if they're the kind of people who buy the most expensive strollers on the market and dress the kids up like fashion accessories, I could totally see them buying this fairly limited handheld console for their children. But the writing in this ad is just overflowing with that sensibility of, oh, we're so little and sweet. We made this just for you. We hope you like it. You know what? We just want to make you happy.
We wanted to try something different.
You can even play it by candlelight.
Really?
Maybe. Playdate was dreamed up by this company called Panic. They're in Portland. They love making things.
If you're watching this, and congratulations, you are a fairy princess. That means that you are pretty and little and sweet.
And it's a tone which, for me, culminates in this weirdly cringy moment.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Thanks. That means a lot.
There's also this borderline subliminal moment in the ad that seems to just use a ton of stock footage. In slight contrast, the Playdate update video, which I think was released the very same day as this ad, is a definite improvement in terms of watchability. It's mostly people speaking directly to camera, and as far as I know, these are all longtime employees of Panic, and they don't seem to really be on-camera talent, like professionally. I don't think they've had training training in that area. And so, whether by design or not, that just contributes to the overall branding of innocence and sincerity. Now, whether you believe these sort of higher level branding messages being created by Playdate marketing materials, that's up to you. But personally, I think that I can move past a lot of this quirk stuff and a lot of the branding thanks to the apparent strength of the product itself. In fact, it sort of reminds me of those follow-up commercials from Head On.
Head on, apply Jockey to the forehead. Head on, apply. Head on, your commercial is so annoying, but you got it great.
Playdate itself really isn't that special in its overall aesthetic or even just its product silhouette. In fact, it's been noted at this point that a lot of industrial designers have settled into a general aesthetic of a rectangle with rounded corners of some form. Playdate is just plain appealing, especially to someone like me who grew up with old handhelds. It obviously borrows a lot from retro handheld gaming devices, but through its visuals in particular, it establishes itself as modern and stylish. I also think Panic has been successful in their choice of developers and games to showcase, purely because of the aesthetics of these games. The games themselves seem to either go hard into the retro realm and how they present themselves, or they show off an undoubtedly contemporary illustration look with bubbly, appealing character designs and quirky game concepts. When one of the Playdate videos mentioned that a lot of the design input came from teenage engineering, I was, what's the opposite of surprised? Nothing? Like, not surprised? I guess I was nothing about it. No, but it made a lot of sense. In fact, I am kind of surprised that this wasn't just a teenage engineering product. If you're unfamiliar, Teenage Engineering is a design group based in Stockholm, Sweden, and aside from working with IKEA in recent years on some limited run products that are now quite hard to find, unless you want to pay a bunch of money, they're known quite well in the world of music gear, especially electronic music gear and high-end speakers. Their flagship product, the OP1, or Operator 1, is a standalone instrument and workstation combining synths, effects, drum kits, sequencers, and a digital 4-track tape machine where you assemble each project. It's expensive, it's popular, and it's beautiful. In fact, I had my OP1 for 3 years before I had to sell it off, and I still miss it every single day. I wasn't even really using it that often towards the end. Just having it around was a treat. I mean, look at the thing. TE also created the Pocket Operators, which are tiny, sequencer-based synthesizers and samplers that each feature their own adorable animation on a liquid crystal display. Maybe you've heard of this concept of lateral thinking using withered technology. Basically, you design a product using older tech that isn't really in high demand anymore, but you apply it in such a way that it appeals to modern customers. Specifically, the screens used in the Pocket Operators and the OP1 fit their applications perfectly, but these components on their own would be considered obsolete for many other contemporary products. Teenage Engineering also has a real knack for making devices that are inviting and fun. The OP1, for example, has a secret helicopter game inside, and most major features of the device are tied to their own colorful animations. And if you're wondering where that Playdate crank came from, well, I have an idea. Teenage Engineering really likes cranks. They seem to like imitations of analog control in general, but specifically the OP1 accessory pack included a little plastic crank attachment that could be fitted over one of the rotary encoders of the device, enabling new functionality in the process. In fact, I'm convinced that that cute telephone line music box game thing that was featured in a Playdate video was directly inspired by the music box style playing possible on the OP1 using the crank. Similarly, Playdate appears at first to be quite basic, but I think they've done a good job of showing off very creative potential uses of its basic features and inputs. But you know what? None of this hemming and hawing about branding and advertisement narratives and hipster sensibilities really answers the big question. Why did I pre-order this? Why did I not only want a Playdate, but purchase a Playdate? Let's get to the meat. I'll admit that my initial reason for wanting to buy a Playdate was pure consumerist impulse. It had a striking design, I like little gadgets in general, and I assumed that it wouldn't be too expensive. Originally, I expected it to cost about $100, but when I heard $189, I wasn't freaked out. Don't get me wrong, it's still a lot of money, especially for what is essentially a toy. The marketing didn't necessarily convince me, but it did create a strong association between Playdate and indie gaming. It's a 1-bit handheld system with no analog sticks. It was bound to be indie. And in general, I play a lot of indie games. Indie games on Switch are what got me back into playing games in general, and I get genuinely excited about fun, creative, original indie titles. But I think that one of the most appealing aspects of Playdate, and one of my biggest motivations for buying it, is its potential. Now, that's a tough line to walk, selling a device on potential. In some cases, I think it can be borderline unethical, because you're not selling the product as much as selling what the product could be one day. Looking at the Playdate itself, I know how quickly the excitement will wear off once it's in my hands. Whether it takes a week or a year, there will come a time when it's no longer exciting or novel to me. That's just how consumer products work, especially tech gadgets. And when a new device loses its sheen, that's when the cage comes down, so to speak. That's when it becomes clear what the real value of the device is to you, the person who bought it. I think the Switch is a really good example of this. At first glance, it's a slick and playful tech thing that has a great hook. But after a while, you start to take the hybrid nature of the system for granted. It's just something you're used to. And the Switch is no longer interesting on its own. That's when it has to survive on the strength of its software. Based on what we know right now, Playdate will include Season 1, which is made up of 24 games handed out 2 at a time, once a week for 12 weeks. As Panic admits in the promo video, there's also no guarantee that you'll like these games. You don't get to pick these games. Also, these are more or less bound to be pretty short experiences, right? That's not confirmed, I'm just assuming they will be based on the limitations of the hardware and the internal storage space available. So what will Playdate have to offer after that first season? Well, I get the sense that they plan to do more seasons of games in the future, maybe. They might also just sell newer games as one-offs. Panic has also made it very clear that they want everyone to be able to make games for Playdate. Every Playdate can be a developer unit. They're sending out SDKs, but they've also talked up a browser-only, low-code game dev tool. In a stream, Panic co-founder Stephen Frank talked about how people will be free to distribute games they've made for the Playdate on the Playdate, but that Panic would probably curate submitted games as well. Also, none of this stuff is completely confirmed. Don't take it as gospel. I'm sure it's all subject to change. But in the end, the long-term value of Playdate, beyond some potential value as a collector's item, depends heavily on two main things: Panic's ability to bring in some fantastic commissioned games, and the strength of user-submitted content. Let's talk about the first part. Panic has mentioned in many marketing materials that they have done a bit of video game publishing in the past, specifically for Firewatch and Untitled Goose Game, a piece of information that was heavily misconstrued in Engadget's second video on Playdate, where the presenter calls Panic the makers of these games, which isn't accurate.
It's from Panic, the makers of Mac software like Transmit and Coda, as well as indie games like Firewatch and Untitled Goose Game.
Maybe the person writing the script didn't understand the difference between game development and game publishing, or maybe they hoped that this lanky sentence structure would shroud that detail and ambiguity. That's basically a real-life YouTube comment. Between that history of game publication and the official Playdate games that they've shown off so far, I feel fairly confident in Panic's ability to deliver some interesting stuff. They've apparently gotten Bennett Foddy on board, for example, so that should be interesting. Or not. As for the other side, I honestly have no idea to what degree user-developed software is going to bolster Playdate's long-term value. Of course, this is not the first time a company has created a product with the intention of letting customers sustain the product over longer periods of time via mass amounts of what really amounts to unpaid work. Several game design games highlight this model. We've got Mario Maker 1 and 2, Dreams, and more recently, Nintendo's Game Builder Garage. Also, you've got all of social media or Kickstarter, all these things whose value is created almost exclusively by users. I'm not saying that this model is automatically questionable or unethical, although there is a discussion to be had on the topic of tech companies benefiting from unpaid micro-labor performed by users. We could even argue that I'm performing some unpaid labor right now, both by creating YouTube content in exchange for absolutely nothing, and by providing detailed information about how I responded to specific marketing efforts. And aside from all that mess, I don't know how Panic plans to manage and monetize games created and submitted by people who aren't established developers. They might not charge money for these games, or if they do, they might give the devs a cut of the sales, but neither of those things happened with any of the community-dependent games or community-dependent communities I just mentioned. I also assume that Panic will have some method for screening submissions. I can't imagine that they'd want just anybody distributing absolutely anything through their platform. But even so, despite some concerns, I find myself excited about the idea of messing around with game dev using the Playdate as a base camp. So I guess in a way, I wasn't just paying for the potential of the product itself, but also paying for the potential of what I could do with it if I really commit myself, kind of like exercise equipment. Playdate also allows side loading in general, so there's a good chance there will be some emulation stuff happening on here too. I'm definitely not quite as excited about Playdate as I was at first glance, but I'll probably keep the pre-order active and wait to see what it's really worth to me. But that brings us to the end of my public purchase rationalization. I don't have any huge points for you here. I don't have like big takeaways that I want to solidify as part of this discussion. I guess more than anything, I wanted to bring up the topic of the ways in which we potentially respond to different marketing efforts, especially for tech devices or tech-motivated companies that try to act like your friend and try to act very chummy and like they really care about people and the environment and all that stuff. Whether or not it's accurate is a whole other discussion. But please let me know if you've had a somewhat similar experience. Please let me know how you feel about Playdate's marketing so far. Are these things that you think about in general? Is this something that tends to fly under the radar for you and you really just go about your business trying to find products that you really need? So many questions arise from this that I didn't want to cap it all off with like a definitive statement about what it all means. I don't think it's really, I don't think that's fitting for the subject matter. But in the meantime, please feel free to say things at me in the comments, and thanks for stopping by.